Oi, oi, alright, how's it going? I'm Grant, this is Doodle Review, and I'm continuing Rock Week with a bit of a special Queens of the Stone Age themed edition. I just saw them live twice this week, which was so much fun, and I'm currently preparing a bit of a worst to best of their related side bands. So to do that, I've had to listen to and review a few records that I wasn't familiar with, namely the Troy Van Leeuwen project, Enemy, and John Theodore's Life Coach project. I thought a good way to share these thoughts on these lesser known projects would be to package them with a review of the latest Nick Oliveri Mondo Generator album and revisit the legendary Them Crooked Vultures album. So let's check it out. Now just sit back and watch the whole lot, or just, skip along to the bits that you care about in the description. I'll link them. Don't forget to hurl some abuse in the comments after, and let's go! It's been about 15 years since legend has it Dave Grohl set Led Zeppelin's John Paul Jones and Queens of the Stone Age's Josh Homme up on something of a blind date, seating the pair who hadn't yet met together at Grohl's birthday party. Fortunately for rock fans, the two hit it off famously, and within a couple of years of that encounter, that supergroup, an often misused and kind of grotesque label, but about as appropriate as you can get in this instance, that supergroup released an album. The drummer of Nirvana, the bassist of Led Zeppelin, the frontman of Queens of the Stone Age, and the often overlooked but very vital and equally as talented Alan Johannes became Them Crooked Vultures. With both the band being formed and album recorded in secret, it wasn't until a few months prior to the release that word got out. This was 2009, so it was before social media had truly taken off, but even then confined to primitive message boards. The speculation and rumours were wild. Once the tiniest sliver of news regarding the rock team up came out, you had people releasing fake teasers. There was this very sinister sounding acoustic guitar one that I very clearly remember, and people were also leaking fake track lists, artwork, all sorts. Eventually official teasers were released, and I must have listened to that tiny snippet of what would become No One Loves Me and Neither Do I, Elephants and Scumbag Blues a few hundred times at least in that summer of 2009. Then came the surprise live appearances, a midnight show in Chicago at the Metro, and a surprise slot at Reading Festival revealed an album's worth of material to lucky fans. The album's official release was Monday, November the 16th. This was before the move to Friday releases, and so I remember getting up early on a cold Monday morning to go to HMV to ensure I had it before college, having to wait all day with the CD burning a hole in my bag. And the album blew my teenage mind, of course. I was an unapologetic Homme Grohl fanboy, and while not all the way in on Led Zepp, I'd grown up with it in my household and understood their totemic presence in the pantheon of rock music. It might have been the most excited I'd ever been about music. I just couldn't stop listening to it. I couldn't stop talking about it. I think I fucking quoted the line, "If sex is a weapon, then smash, boom, pow, how you like me now," on a Facebook status, which is just cringe on so many levels. Just the error of the status, and I was 17, so the only weapon sex analogies anyone that age can be making is maybe how do you get the safety on and something to do with recoil. Anyway, don't judge me. I was young, naive, and very overexcited. The rest of the world, well, I remember reviews trending positive, but I don't think anyone really heralded it as the second coming. A common opinion I observed at the time was just oh, it sounds like Queens of the Stone Age. And I would have disagreed on instinct without consideration back then, but today, I have to say, even though I've grown to acknowledge and even share some criticisms of this record, I'd still disagree with that. Once you hear past Homme's vocals, I'd say there is a pretty distinct set of parameters that govern a Queen's tune versus a Vultures track, and it comes down to arrangement. Both bands are obviously riff based and have a tendency to go long with it, although Queen's a lot less than a casual fan might actually think. But when Queens do go long, they either do so by stacking parts on parts on parts, or by going super robotic with it and repetitive. The Vultures literally go into full classic 70s rock mode, actually jamming segments with no goal other than to entertain. And I can't think of a song really in the Queen's canon that creates space for and comes back to an instrumental solo section in a way that Scumbag Blues or Warsaw does. And that's before we get into the musical fingerprints left by the members themselves. Much is made of the skill of each band member within the field that they're most known, Grohl on drums, Jones on bass, Homme on guitar. But the band actually revealed that some of their most fruitful writing sessions came out of their actually swapping roles. Jones, of course, being a famed multi-instrumentalist even before he joined Zeppelin, would be the reason that we get a Doors organ on Caligula, or a clavinet on Scumbag Blues, or a mandolin on the non-album track Highway 1. So while I think most songs likely started with some sort of Homme riff or idea, these different accompaniments absolutely pushed the final tracks well away from where they may have ended up on a Queen's record. I'm actually convinced that the bridge riff in New Fang that ends with an open string ringing out is potentially also a Grohl addition as well. It has a very Presence-era Jimmy Page vibe to it in the same way the Foos track Rope does. And that's an influence he freely kind of copped to around this period. Lyrically and thematically, the Animal Kingdom quite obviously serves as much of the inspiration for Homme on this record. Vultures, elephants, fangs and reptiles. Even the songs that don't reference some sort of creature by name still explore this theme though, boiling down our human emotions and behaviours to animalistic instincts, whether based in lust, like Nobody Loves Me, or violence, like Gunman, and prodding at the notion of our self-decreed laws of man as a facade over the primal laws of nature, as on Mind Eraser No Chaser. That track even embraces the animal theme at an instrumental level, with its core guitar riff built around this donkey motif, a totally boneheaded sound that I know plays perfectly into that, the guitarist's twisted sensibilities. These lyrics, while having a very clear theme, represent Homme at his most metaphorical. The majority of songs in his career up until this point were shrouded in mystery, but I think it's most successfully done on the Vultures record. The fact that his subsequent lyrics in Queens would adopt a more personal I, you, we perspective also makes me feel like he'd taken that guarded, metaphorical, philosophical approach about as far as possible here too, but it really pays off. Despite my clear appreciation for this record, it's not perfect. Although I defended the album's independent style earlier, I would say that Dead End Friends feels like a bit of Queens on autopilot, executed amazingly, but pretty bland by all accounts. It wouldn't surprise me if this was a Lullabies to Paralyze or Era Vulgaris leftover used to kind of kick off the writing sessions and get the creative juices flowing. Bandoliers is another instance where I think the technical execution overrides the core songwriting. Grohl's drumming is powerful and just locked in with a really great groove, and it's especially fun to watch live. I especially love that roll that bursts back in after the break before the second verse. But it's a bit repetitive and somewhat uninspired from a kind of melodic and songwriting standpoint. And on certain days, Mind Eraser can also feel a little bit too on the wacky side, like a bit of a parody of itself, but I appreciate that might also be the point. Anyway, these minor points are far outweighed by the majority of classic moments here. Favourite of which, after all these years actually being Spinning in the Daffodils, some recent stripped back acoustic performances have revealed the dark beauty at the very core of that song, and I still continue to get the Mark Lanegan Never Come Down interpolation in my head from time to time, just completely unprompted out of nowhere. This was a big album in my lifetime, one of the most exciting musical moments I've experienced. While time has allowed me to be a little bit more objective, I'd probably give this an 8 out of 10. It's absolutely imprinted on my mind forever, and if you've not dived in before, you definitely should treat yourself. Nick Oliveri might be most well known for his time as Queens of the Stone Age's naked, screaming bass player, but at this point his stint in that band is a relatively short excursion in a storied career that collaborating with many artists, in addition to releasing a wealth of solo material both inside and outside of the Mondo Generator banner. I think the perception of Oliveri is that he is forever releasing aggro, hard rock rages a la Queens' Tension Head, but in fact his output over the long term is a fair bit more diverse than he gets credit for, whether releasing his own acoustic records or joining instrumental psychedelic wanderers like Big Scenic Nowhere. That being said, over the past 5 to 10 years, Oliveri has very much gotten back in touch with his roots in hardcore punk, playing with old school legends in the scene like Blast, and forming supergroups with Bloodclot with members of Cro-Mags. These collaborations have seemingly been inspiring to Oliveri, who has very much brought these influences into his main solo outlet, Mondo Generator. We Stand Against You, the project's 7th official record, follows 2020's double release of Fuck It and Shooter's Bible, delivering an album that sounds like an answer to the question, what if you shipped Gigi Allen into the desert with only Meth and Early Black Flag as his backing band? If you aren't familiar with those reference points, that basically means the resulting music is unhinged, feral, fast and aggressive. But does that make a good album? Well, the answer is sort of. The performances on We Stand Against You are some of the tightest I've ever heard from the band. The intensity and conviction is dialed up to the max, and there are some really creative and fun riffs and songwriting. Opener I Stand Against You / Blast Off in particular demonstrates this right from the jump, starting off like Keith Morris era Flag and then switching up into a 70s style psych jam. Death March, from the guitar tone to the riffs themselves, plays like a very knowing tip of the hat to the aforementioned Queen's track Tension Head, or I should say the Mondo Generator track 13th Floor, the original version of that song. The similarities are so stark, it plays almost like a nightmarish remix, which is actually really fun. The closer, For a Day, features some Caius-esque drum rolls and feels like the band firing on all cylinders. Where the album loses out for me, and it's probably antithetical to capturing the unhinged effect the band is going for, but what it's missing is some strong production. Not in a sense of sound engineering or mixing, but someone that could nurture some of the tracks from an arrangement and delivery point of view. Rubber Room, for instance, has a cool hook in there with that kind of now it comes vocal part, but the band are going so fast, giving it no room to breathe, so it just stays completely buried. As such, that song, at least in its first half, goes by without giving the listener anything to latch onto, and the same could also be said for 1, 2, 3, 4. While tight and punchy, there is a lack of focus on the vocals of Conspiracy, Fact or Theory, which is as eye-roll inducing and rambling as you might expect, and it undercuts the good music. This one gives strong old man yells at cloud vibes, but more like desert meth rider yells at rules, man. I Want Out has a cool groove and a great lead guitar part, but just features Oliveri rambling his tits off again. And next up is Sky Valley Meth, which, oh yeah, did I mention meth? To be fair, this is a classic hardcore rager, and you are reminded how rad Oliveri's vocal style is with this one. Ultimately, I do think Mondo Generator doesn't really get enough credit for its unique sound. There isn't really anyone out there combining this hardcore and desert rock aesthetic, and if they are, they don't have the completely one-of-a-kind crazy of Nick Oliveri fronting them. They were a band you definitely need to see live, but on record, the outside influence needed to elevate the creative energy and get the best from the group is missing, in my opinion. Leaving just a few kind of genuinely enjoyable moments within a storm of complete chaos. This is a 5 out of 10 for me, but with a very strong acknowledgement that what we have here might be exactly as it's intended to be. It was in preparation for this deep dive into the side bands of Queens that I had to address a Troy Van Leeuwen sized hole in my musical library, namely his 2005 project Enemy, a 3-piece band featuring Kelly Scott of Failure on drums and Mark Lanigan Band's Eddie Nappy on bass, led by Van Leeuwen on lead guitars and vocals. They released their one and only album Hooray for Dark Matter in 2005, and Troy Van Leeuwen, or TVL, I'll sometimes refer to him as here just to spice things up in this long monologue where he's mentioned several times. He's had a long and dynamic career, and I think it's important to address this background before getting into analysis, because these experiences loom large over the album in question. Van Leeuwen began playing in various minor rock groups throughout the 80s and early 90s until meeting Kelly Scott, drummer of the influential but criminally overlooked alternative space rock band Failure. Although receiving nowhere near the recognition they should have, Failure were on a major label and playing significant slots within the massive alternative rock scene of the late 90s. When their third and most ambitious album, Fantastic Planet, released in 1996, the group needed a second guitarist to reproduce the lush walls of sound they had created. Here Enter Our Boy. It was through this appointment that Van Leeuwen would meet many figures that would become important later in his career. He'd share a bill with future Queens Josh Homme and Mark Lanigan while they were playing in Screaming Trees, and the enigmatic frontman Maynard James Keenan while touring with Tool. It was this latter meeting that informed the next move. After Failure's demise in 1997, Tool's Keenan would recruit TVL onto his new project. The band would become cult heroes in the evolved alternative scene of the early 2000s in a perfect circle. Of course, nothing in the music industry is ever as clean and linear as that, so in those on-again, off-again moments, Van Leeuwen would pick up engineering spots, working on records for industrial acts like Orgy and nu metal and rap metal acts like Korn and Crazy Town. While I don't imagine all of those positions were selected due to any great affinity with the music, this experience with heavier and more digital elements represents a significant aspect of the guitarist's palette. In the Queens over the years, this has manifested tonally, with Van Leeuwen's role a dual one, spinning gritty riffs but also creating atmosphere and texture by wrangling a wide array of effects. Here in Enemy, the primary songwriter role, all of these experiences, influences and tastes are brought together completely unencumbered by the need to service someone else's vision, and the results are ambitious, interesting but flawed. The album's most remarkable achievement is that musically, this truly is the distillation of TVL's entire resume. We get the wall of guitar sound of Failure, aided of course by the drummer of said band being present throughout, the alternative kind of spookiness of A Perfect Circle, and the swing and rock and roll grit of Queens of the Stone Age. Instrumentally, despite being a bit overlong and with some filler tracks like the 3 All Escapes for example, Hooray for Dark Matter is pretty excellent, but it's the lyrics and singing that just bring everything down. And it's not that Van Leeuwen has an inherently bad voice, it's very alt-rock, it suits the music. He kind of at points feels like a lower register Billy Corgan, but it's more the combination of kind of awkward lyrics, dull melodies and just this overall sense of kind of forcing it. The record kicks off with Action, a song that has great energy and some cool rhythmic guitar parts, but the central issue with the vocals is apparent almost immediately. I really feel like overall there's a swing for a kind of Trent Reznor approach, a frontman that's guilty of cringe lyrics and nasally vocals but somehow pulls it all off. The somehow in that sentence is the X factor, a star quality and charisma, which in turn feeds a conviction that can turn a track like 9 Inch Nails' Deep with awful lyrics into an absolute banger. Compare that to songs like Clean and Freeway on the Enemy record. Both are produced well, have great hooks, but just lack the conviction in the delivery to sell a lyric like On the Freeway. To be fair to him, Troy is like this close to pulling it off. He comes a hair's breadth from achieving it, but sadly, it just never quite gets there. And it's a real shame because, as mentioned, the alt-rock alchemy delivered in the music is really spectacular, but as demonstrated by the best groups in the alt-rock scene, you generally need that star power, that enigmatic figure to bring it all together. For me, I would say this is about a 4 out of 10. Life Coach is a project started initially as a solo outlet for guitarist and multi-instrumentalist Phil Manley, a member of many bands, but most notably the 90s post-rock band Trans Am. Created as a means to indulge his fixation with prog and krautrock, Manley wrote, performed and produced the first Life Coach record alone in 2011, but for its follow-up, in order to produce something more aligned to live performance, Manley brought on drummer John Theodore, and the album Alphawaves was released in 2013. Theodore is the draw for me here. I've been preparing a piece on the many side bands and projects of members of Queens, and so it was the promise of his drums that led me to the album. Initially knowing nothing about Manley and his previous output, I kind of assumed the name Life Coach would be an ironic name for a band that delivered something maybe more akin to beach indie bands like Waves, but with a harder edge given Theodore's thundering drumming prowess. The almost new age music feel of the first two tracks though completely threw me and led me to believe that there's far less irony in the band's name than I thought. Although each track does eventually blossom into a driving krautrock groove with meandering and progressive guitar melodies wheedling over the main thrust of, the track, this is most definitely an album to check out if krautrock is your thing. It also gave me the feeling of like mid-2000s bands like Secret Machines at points as well, with the use of blocky, chunky bass lines and naturally crushing heavy drums. It might seem like the opinion of a bit of a square among true prog and krautrock fans to say that the best tracks on this album are those with vocals, but it's not actually the accessibility of a more traditional song structure that make the stoner rock-esque Fireball or space rock Mind's Eye the standouts here. It's the expansive arrangements and honestly the absurdity of how in the pocket Theodore's propulsive drum grooves are. While the drawn out trance-like krautrock cuts are interesting and definitely head bobbable, they all seem to lack that propulsion of the vocal tracks here, and that coupled with the fact that a lot of time is given to drone-like jam pieces, I would say that this record never really gets above a 5 out of 10 for me. Enjoyable and occasionally attention grabbing, but otherwise a little middling. But what do you think of these albums? Do you agree with my takes? Send some love, have some abuse in the comments below. Check out the links in the description to other stuff you might like on my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.